All right, looks like we're live. Good evening, everyone, good people. We are excited to be here, Roots of Justice, representing tonight. And we're here to talk about the recent election. We're here to talk about what's going on all around us, all around me, all around you. And the topic tonight is white supremacy always wins the election. And so the five of us are here to just have a porch conversation. You've come to enjoy them, I hope, from us as we share our thoughts, our questions, our frustrations, our ponderings. And we'll certainly be fielding your questions in the feed, the Facebook Live chat. Go ahead and put them in there if you have any questions that you'd like us to address. And we're just giving you a little bit of insight into the way that we Roots of Justice trainers converse, sharpen each other, share, learn from each other, and of course, bringing in minds that we want to learn from and glean from as well. So we've got a couple of trainers, and then we have other folks who we consider part of our circle of wisdom, people that we learn from. So we're really glad to be here with you tonight. I'm going to introduce myself, but we're all here as equals, and I'm just going first. My name is Jessica. I'm coming from Philadelphia, and I am a diversity, equity, inclusion trainer and consultant in the region, also Roots of Justice trainer, and a fat yoga teacher, which I love being. So yeah, I bring that perspective, and I'm going to pass it over to Conrad, who can share what perspective he brings.
I'm going to pass it to Shaashawn first, if you don't mind, Jessica. Thank you.
That's great.
Well, greetings. Thank you, King, for passing it. And thank you, Queen, for blessing the mic in the virtual space ecosystem first. My name is Shaashawn Dial, and I am a Army brat, Gemini, firstborn, full-figured Black woman, WOMXN, spelled that way, not because I have any hatred for men. I don't. I just need to remind myself on a daily that I don't only have to define myself by my relationships to men. I am queer, I am cisgender, I am able-bodied, I am flawed, I am a work in evolution. And I'm definitely passionate about having uncomfortable, courageous, difficult conversations. I like to say taking private conversations public and breaking the social programming that so many of us received of don't go out of this dwelling, be that a house or double wide or an apartment, the projects and army bases, and not talk about sex, money, politics, religion, sexual orientation. That was for our safety then, but as adults, we need to be able to have these conversations and to walk boldly in our identities and also in our efforts to be aspiring allies. So I am just blessed to be among these amazing humans, right? HUEMANS, and also to learn and grow with everybody who's able to pop in and stay for a while. So I thank Nick Miron for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be with one of my teachers, Conrad, who I've learned so much from. And it's a pleasure to meet Queen Jessica and King Dan. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Shaashawn. I'm here. This is a Roots of Justice first time collaborating with another organization for this kind of work. We are collaborating right now with the Apex Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I live, that's where I've moved to. And I am pleased to introduce Dan Moore. And Dan, full disclosure, Dan Moore is my uncle. I'm Conrad Moore. Dan Moore is my uncle. And because of the way family dynamics go in my family, our elders deserve their titles. I've always called my Uncle Dan, and you will hear me call him Uncle Dan tonight because that's the way our family works. And to try to do anything other than that would cause too much cognitive dissonance for me at this particular time. So Uncle Dan is the founder and the president of the Apex Museum. And he will say more about why he founded this amazing museum here in Atlanta, Georgia. He is also an author, and he sent us a bio, which I think we put up on our Facebook page. Not sure. But if not, we'll make sure that we get it up there because Uncle Dan is an author, and his latest book is titled "The White Male Agenda." The White Male Agenda. And you can pick that book up on Amazon. I just actually picked it up the other day. I was going to read some excerpts from it, but I was running around like a muppet trying to get here on time, and I actually wound up leaving the book at home, so I don't have the excerpts from the book. But I can assure you, I read it. I can assure you that it's a very good book. It's worth buying. Amazon, you can get it on Amazon. The White Male Agenda. With that, Uncle Dan.
Thank you, my nephew. It's a pleasure to have you here, number one. And I'm from Philadelphia, Germantown in particular. And I came to Atlanta in 1974 to establish my second film company. And I was here for a while. And then in 1978, I went to a banquet where they were honoring Dr. Benjamin Mays, president of Morehouse College. Dr. Mays had the pleasure, they had the pleasure of dealing with him, but Dr. King and Maynard Jackson was aware of that. Both went to Morehouse and they met Dr. Mays in person. As I went to this banquet and sat and listened to all the accolades given to Dr. Mays, my first question to myself was, what is going to happen to this man and his legacy when he's gone? Will anybody remember who he was? Will anybody remember what impact he had on Black community? That was my first question to myself. Then my second question I asked myself was, of all the cities in the nation, why did not Atlanta have a Black History Museum? Dr. King was born here. SLC began here. Smith started here. John Lewis was here. And many other civil rights leaders came out of here. But yet there was no Black History Museum here. So being who I am, 4 months later, I started the Apex Museum. The Apex is an acronym for African American Panoramic Experience. We have been here for 42 years. And what I thought I was going to do in 2 years, it's 42 years later, but we're still holding strong. We're a nonprofit organization. We own our own building and we own the adjoining land, and we're debt free. Thank you. And our mission is to make sure that we learn and we teach Black history. We were impressed by a professor from one of our local schools here named Asa Hilliard. And every time I saw him, he would say to me, whatever you do, never let them start our history with slavery. That's when we initiated our exhibit. It's called Africa, the Untold Story. Being a filmmaker, I did a couple of films that we show here daily when we're open. One of them is called The Journey. It's narrated by R.C. Davis. The other one is called Sweet Auburn, which is a street in Atlanta, Georgia. Sweet Auburn, Street of Pride, which is narrated by Cicely Tyson and Julian Bond. It was certainly sorrowful to hear about her passing. She was a very beautiful person, and she read a poem that I wrote some years ago and did a job on that I never would have been able to do myself. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. Can y'all hear me okay? Is there still an echo?
A little bit.
I'm trying to reposition myself so that we can work out the details here. Thanks, Uncle Dan.
As I said before, my pleasure.
So then there is Nick. Nick, you want to go next?
All right. Yeah, Uncle Dan, Mr. Dan Moore, thank you for being here too. It's a pleasure. I've heard your nephew talk about you, so it's great to have this collaboration finally come to fruition. Conrad, Shaashawn, and Jess, it's a pleasure as always. I've learned with and from you all in so many deep and powerful ways. I'm Nick Miron. I'm from living currently in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I wasn't sure I'd make it here tonight. It's snowing pretty hard outside. So, you know, weather, travel, living room to this room, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it, but I made my way. So, yeah, I've been intentionally anti-racist for 15 years and still working to develop my understanding and ability to combat racism simultaneously, personally, interpersonally, and institutionally. And so, pleasure to spend time having this conversation with you all tonight.
If I keep myself muted, can you hear me?
That sounds good.
Good, you can hear me through Uncle Danny's speaker. He's got good equipment in here. Oh, that's great. As I said earlier, my name's Conrad Moore, Jr. And I'm a trainer with Roots of Justice, and I've been a trainer with Roots of Justice before Roots of Justice was actually Roots of Justice. It was Damascus Road. So I've been with Roots of Justice since the late 90s. So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm passionate about this work. And I've said this more than once. This is work that I feel called to. And that means that I get energy from doing the work and would absolutely do it for free. However, I would gladly accept money when it comes my way. One of the subjects that we wanted to explore tonight, and when we do these events, you know, you never get to explore them exhaustively because they are complex. And too often, people, groups, or organizations, or seminars, in my opinion, they pretend that these issues are simple, that you can work through the whole thing in a half day or a 2 hour or 3 hour, but you can't, because the issues are way too complex. So we're gonna talk some about white supremacy. And one of the reasons why we have to talk about white supremacy is because white supremacy has won every single presidential election since this nation became a nation. And so we are not here to throw shade at Joe Biden or any Democrat or Republican, because racism and white supremacy did not start with the previous administration, and it will not end with the current presidential administration. So for those of us who are educators and organizers, that means we need to know what our organizing tasks are, because the struggle continues. So what are the organizing tasks, and how do we move forward? So I want to say a little bit about white supremacy in the context that we teach when we talk about it at Roots of Justice, in our Roots of Justice trainings. We understand that white supremacy, just like we understand that African American culture did not start in 1619 when Africans were brought here as captives, white supremacy was a pre-existing condition of the Europeans who came here. So, and I use the word pre-existing condition because that's what it was. For most of the Europeans who came here, white supremacy was a pre-existing condition. And where did they get it from? In 1455, there was the church. This was before any people who are Christians would recognize that if you're a Protestant Christian, there was such a thing called the Protestant Reformation, and that happened in the early 1500s. But this predates that. So in 1455, there was the church, and it was the Catholic Church at that time, and it kind of ruled the Christian world. And the leader of that church put out a document that basically told King Alfonso of Portugal that he had the authority to vanquish, subdue, to capture, to render to perpetual slavery. Here it is: to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, subdue, and to render their persons to perpetual slavery. Well, who was he talking about? I mean, and he actually said to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. He was talking to King Alfonso of Portugal, and he was talking about Africans. So Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue, but I remember this document happened in 1455. So in 1492, Columbus now is a young man who has been nurtured in an atmosphere of religious superiority, because the religious person, the Pope, basically believed he had the authority to tell King Alfonso that he could invade, search out, capture, vanquish, subdue, and to reduce persons to perpetual slavery. The Pope thought he had the authority to give that to King Alfonso, and so he did. Columbus grew up in an atmosphere of religious superiority that happened in Europe. And so religious superiority morphed into white supremacy. And so when the Europeans came here, they came with a pre-existing condition of white supremacy, believing themselves to be superior. And so we start there. That pre-existing condition has become a part of the cultural DNA of the United States. It is part of what makes the United States tick. And by cultural DNA, I mean it's a DNA, it's a cultural DNA marker passed on from generation to generation. And that's why we have such a problem with white supremacist, not just ideology, but white supremacist violence, even today. So having said all of that, to set the stage for the rest of our conversation, I'm going to pass it to anybody else who actually has some comments.
I really love that you entered into that language, that medical terminology of pre-existing condition, for a whole bunch of reasons. But the one that kind of like stands out to me just immediately is we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and the medical industrial complex is a big portion of evidence of how white supremacy works. I mean, we can also look at, the opioid epidemic and how that has unfolded. We could look at the crack epidemic and how that unfolded. We can go on, we can look at maternal death rates and how that unfolds. And so over and over and over again, we see the pre-existing condition of white supremacy and how it impacts the health of everybody else. So just a thought. You put that together and now I'm bouncing on it a little bit. So I'd like to hear more thoughts from others about that.
Thank you.
Well, you're right on target, number one. And that's one thing we have not been able to accept for the most part. And we have failed, in my opinion, to realize that existed then and exists now. And our exhibit we have here at the Apex is called Africa, the Untold Story. Part of that exhibit, we talk about Britain. Number one, here's a country that's a very small country. It's about the size of Kansas, I'm told. Yet they call themselves Great Britain. So the first thing I think about is how can someone that small say to the world, this is Great Britain? Then when I think about some of the people who followed in later years, one of the ambassadors said, history will be kind to me because I intend to tell it. And that is very true, because whoever tells history, they, if it's accepted, they are the ones who can form it the way they want to form it. And then there was the Berlin Conference, where the European nations sat down and divided Africa. And when I look at the map that we have here of Africa after colonization, one thing became very clear, that Britain, or Great Britain as they call themselves, was the second largest colonizer, not of a country, but of the entire continent of Africa. So how in the world did this small country capture and rule over this major continent and become only second only to France? So that is the beginning point that I look at when I think about white supremacy. And if you are in control and you have that kind of mentality, you have to first of all begin to spread that thought process of the people. Once we accept that,
Come on,
they are superior,
come on,
we're automatically saying that we must be inferior.
come on.
So we look for them to do everything and anything that needs to be done, not with us, but for us or against us. And that has been what has happened traditionally over a number of years. We have in this city of Atlanta, university called Emory University. It has the largest collection of slave ship logs in the country. They can tell what ship left from a certain port, how many enslaved were on board, and where it went. Of course, they started going to South America. Then they went to the islands, and then of course to North America. When Haiti defeated those armies that landed on their shore, they declared they would make Haiti the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, and thus set up all kinds of barriers, all kinds of injunctions that kept Haiti very poor. But in spite of Haiti's power at that time, I'm told even up until recently, that Haiti is now paying reparations to France.
Yeah.
And as some of the kids say, go figure. So when you look at what we are going through, what we have been going through, we have a country that claims it's very great, that says it's very great, that claims it's compassionate. But when you look at the history of this country, it is all except that. And even slavery, although it was practiced in other countries years ago, there was nothing as cruel as the slavery that was practiced on these shores in the Americas. When you think about white supremacy, when you think about that kind of arrogance, we then unlearn about the Native American who they try to say to us, we're so friendly, accepted them, and they were their friends. But almost every treaty that America signed with the Native American, they broke.
Not almost.
Okay.
Yeah, they broke them all.
Okay. I was just corrected by my nephew. They broke every treaty
They broke them all.
that they signed. When you look at what's going on even today, my understanding and my thought process is, if you can teach a man he is less than you, and then ingrain that into his brain, that man will almost always be subjected to you. The very first film that I did, and I will never forget this, was back in the 1960s. The very first film I did, I bought a camera, I went straight to Liberia, went straight to Africa to see what Africa was really about. The only image I had of Africa was a white man in a loincloth swinging through the trees named Tarzan, who was talking to the animals and to the natives, and even as one person, he had control. But I wanted to see for myself what was Africa really about. And then it comes to me and comes to my mind that he who controls the media controls the mind. Because of all I ever saw was this one white man in a loincloth ruling this whole continent. And I was convinced there must have been something going on that made all of these hundreds or thousands of individuals feel subservient. When I look at what they have done to this motherland, to this cradle of civilizations, it reinforces that they want to conquer anything they put their eyes on. And they have learned how to do it by compromising the rule of that country and claiming their state. Africa is shown on television, it's shown in magazines, it's as the proverbial young black child, very thin, malnutrition, swollen belly, and the proverbial fly on the lip. That was what was seen and shown. And so the world looks at Africa and concludes this is a very poor country, and yet it is the richest continent in the world. Diamonds, silver, gold, platinum, uranium, all coming from Africa. And when you talk about intelligence, the language began in Africa. Mathematics began in Africa. Gardening began in Africa. And even architecture began in Africa, to the extent that today's technology cannot duplicate what they did thousands of years ago, transporting huge blocks across the desert and building a pyramid to precision that today's technology cannot duplicate. When I look at the system of education, if the individuals who are responsible for constructing the educational program that all of us live by and read and acknowledge, if that person is white, that person is a white supremacist, they can make that history seem however they want it to seem. Not conclude by saying the child today, as in yesterday and days before that, can learn more from 12 Black history postage stamps than it can in 12 years of education.
Well said. President Lyndon B. Johnson said once of white supremacy, he said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he is better than the best colored man, you can pick his pockets all day. He said, hell, if you give him somebody to look down on, he will open his pockets for you. And technically, all the average white people get out of white supremacy is a white power t-shirt. That's it. That's it. That's all you get. I mean, you get nothing else but a white power t-shirt, because the rich white people have figured out how to take things from you and point you towards me, so that your anger is then misplaced. You're looking at me like I'm taking something from you, or you're looking at the Mexicans like they taking something from you, but it ain't them, it's Jeff Bezos.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Bezos took away your health care. You know, I didn't have nothing to do with that. Neither did the Mexicans. They had nothing to do with taking away your health care. Jeff Bezos bought Whole Foods, and the stock went up, but the stock didn't go up because they was making more sales. He put more money into the company by taking away y'all's health care. Surprise.
I hear you.
I think part of the problem with white supremacy too is that picking up on where you were leaving off, Mr. Dan Moore, you said about the way we teach the history and stuff, and the T-shirt that we get, Conrad, is that I think part of the issue is that for white folks, it's not just about what you get out of the way our country is set up, but also the way of life that we think is best. And certainly one that serves us, not in a way that's overtly that we understand as white. But especially the history piece, I think back to a friend of mine sent me a podcast about a year ago, on Scene Radio, I think it was called. It's called Rich Man's Revolt. And what they talked about was nothing that was shocking. I've read a lot of history, but they put it in such a succinct way that made me really think about the history that we've learned. And they talked about how the Revolutionary War is pitched as this great patriotic moment where people were fighting for, I got to use air quotes, freedom, right? But it feeds into the sacred notion of what the U.S. is posed as some kind of beacon of liberty and rights and freedom. And the reality of the Revolutionary War was it was rich people fighting to maintain their wealth and get richer. Is really all the war was about, right? But we've been fed this so much that for white folks it's not just, and I think it's kind of scary. It's not just about who has what, and we want to be able to get rich like Jeff Bezos, so we have to hold on to hope and things like that. It's also about the way that we've structured our culture, the values and norms, and saying that this is the way life is supposed to be. And so I'll go without health care. I'll be damned if you're going to get to have some kind of power over my life. That's not going to happen. I'll sacrifice what I have to, but I'm going to be in control of my life, not you, not you in this other way of being where everybody has a voice. And I think they all feed into each other, and it's scary how much this is coming out. Well, even among some of our politicians now, not to get too political, but
Yeah.
you listen to what some of our I mean, there's people in the House of Representatives in Congress who are saying the most, well, you all probably know the news. We don't have to get into that, but it's scary. It's scary.
When you look at what happened on the 6th, the thing that kept going through my mind as I'm watching them tear at each other and tear at those police officers. I mean, with such rage, what I'm watching is I'm watching them claw one another for the privilege, for the illusion of superiority. They are literally fighting to maintain the illusion of superiority, because that's what it is.
True.
I appreciated your context, King Conrad. It brought up a couple things for me. So one is I can't help but, especially when you framed it, that I think the average person doesn't see religion as a U.S. social institution. I think we can get people to buy into medicine, education, law enforcement, media, finance, and banking. But I think there is a pushback that religion is a US institution, yet it was the institution from which the messages came forth of, like you said, invade, subdue, control, and this feeling of, current days, I always say engagement versus outreach, right? Outreach comes with an assumption that I have something, it's of value, and you better be grateful that I'm going to give it to you. Versus engagement of I still may think what I have is a gift and I want to give it to you, but I'm also present with the knowledge that you can be bringing something here and that you have all the right in the world to receive, reject, take pieces of what I think is so valuable that I'm offering. But through the U.S. institution of religion, it was able to say, you are beneath, right? Our indigenous kin, that, those quotes from Christopher Columbus that talk about they were very kind and they didn't have a language and they didn't have a currency. The assumption that when he got off the boat, ankles wet, that there was no other thought that this group of individuals did have a language. It was different from your European language. They did have a system of exchanging services and goods, but because it didn't look the British way, it had to be less than. So I'm always struck by the fact that so few people have language around US social institutions, and the fact that we have to navigate them for survival, that now it becomes clearer to me when we have the evangelical extreme right and the folks who feel that it is literally their duty, their passion, their mission to use religion in order to say what is moral and valued. So I want to thank you for that. For me also, it really helps always bring, what are the ways that white supremacy has shown up and shows up in the present and will continue to show up. And Nick touched on one already, which was there's only one right way. There's one right way to navigate this earth, to have a job, to have a family, to work. There's just one right way. So it continues to show up there. I think it continues to show up in the fear of open conflict.
Mhm.
Right? Like this fact that someone else can't raise an issue, someone else can't raise a different perspective. I mean, I think in a lot of our circles, we'll say lived experience, learned experience, but for a lot of people, because they're in a position of power, or even ironically, as you said, the white t-shirt for the average person, white supremacy has told them, why not you? It should be you. Go ahead. You don't have credentials, you don't have experience, nothing, but your whiteness says, go ahead. It's your birthright. So I think that continues to show up. And of course, I think for white supremacy, it's a single identity lens.
Yeah.
So these individuals who came from Europe were oppressed by their religion. That was it. Most of them, property owning, now we'd say cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual folks praying to roughly the same God, just different labels. And so the fact that that still continues to this day, I see it, with white women who want to equate their sexism to racism, to homophobia, to Islamophobia, right? So that single identity lens just never leaves me. And the fact that our voices continue to be silenced, right? And that it's learned experience over lived. January 6th, someone asked me my opinion about what happened. And I said, I immediately was over white commentators.
You were over what?
And their opinion on January 6th, white commentators, broadcasters, because immediately, the same night it was, how could this have happened? We're going to wait in a couple days and get the security breaches. We're going to wait to talk to the people in positional power who can give us, right, a formal Eurocentric document. And literally, I felt the rage start to come. I was like, I need brown people's analysis, Black and brown people. And so I purposely started trying to find them. And of course, it was right there. They started using language like shocked, but not surprised. And that resonated with me. It was something we hadn't seen in 100 years. So I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised. Yet every single white commentator was like, I'm so surprised. And our liberty and our democracy had been attacked. And I was just floored with the fact that it was scary as heck because it was what we already knew. I knew before the profiles started coming out that was going to be veterans and firefighters.
Right, come on.
And police officers.
Right.
And police officers.
Right.
I knew that. And to me, that was the scariest piece of it, is that these folks on a daily, on autopilot, get to make decisions that impact individuals and groups. Air Force veterans, folks who've served in our armed forces, people still currently serving, meaning you can make decisions depending on your branch about logistics,
Right.
personnel assignments. No wonder why in the military, as the funnel goes up, right, you lose the people of color. You look at enlisted, we Black, brown,
Come on.
Asian Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern diaspora, biracial, multiracial, but you keep going up that funnel of officer and it becomes lily white.
Yeah, the fact that it was police and all that just was not news at all. It just wasn't news.
But the white commentators, it was news. Oh my goodness. And to this day, yet to really hear negative things about their profiles. Unlike any Black or brown person, what's the first thing that comes out? Any charges, a previous record, what their familial configuration is comprised of, how many children they do or don't have, whether they were employed. But no, this one was service records, how many years of service, whether they're married or not, children or not, all in a frame of loss. But not for us. So I really appreciate your framing, because it was bringing up all that for me.
Very well said.
Yeah, big time. This is why I love talking to y'all. These are the spaces that are life-giving for me. These spaces give me energy. Can I read that quote that you were referring to? Because I think I should have read this earlier when I was talking about Columbus. Because when he came here with a white supremacist attitude. And his quote goes like this. And the point about history, which makes this a problem, is we hear bull crap about Lincoln. The only thing that you learn about Lincoln as a person of color, as a child of color, because I went to public school, and when they said Abraham Lincoln, you were supposed to write Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. That was it. And then some bull crap about Honest Abe. So it was Honest Abe, you heard that part, and Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. We had no Christopher Columbus quotes. We had 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but there were no Christopher Columbus quotes. Here's one. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. This was Christopher Columbus's journal. He was speaking about the Arawak Indians upon landing. His other quote, "They have no religion. I believe that they would readily become Christians as they have a good understanding." Christopher Columbus from his journal. So those are the quotes that help me to understand the pre-existing condition of white supremacy that the Europeans came here with.
Very true.
I think, Conrad, it really also speaks to, well, also what Uncle Dan was saying, this spectrum essentially of humanity. You start out with this religious superiority because people move further and further away from human, the further away they get from white Christian man, right? That just further from human, that you have this erasure. So, I mean, the conversation about Haiti, the ability to tap into their spirituality, right? And remove their oppressor, remove the people that were doing harm to them, and then that being framed as worship of the devil, right? And that concept of, it's essentially what we call gaslighting today. I mean, they didn't have that language then, right? Gaslighting, but you harm someone and then you make them think that they are the wrong, they are the evil, they are the crazy for resisting the harm that you're doing to them. But the only reason you have the right to harm them is because they're not humans. Even in that quote, we 50 men, we could subjugate these animals, right? And so you have this spectrum where the person is further and further and further away from human. And we see it not just then in the past, in the papal bull, we see it right now. We saw it in, and we see it in the conversation around Israel. There's a land without a people. There was nobody there. There was no one in the US. When we got here, there was nobody here. There were no Native Americans here when Columbus came. There was no people here. You have all these lands with no humans on them, even though they're fully populated.
Yeah.
The idea that we can just erase people. I went on a trip to South America with a friend, white, and they asked, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Oh, America." And they said, "You're in America." Because of course, the United States of America is the only America there is, right? You erase an entire people, an entire identity,
Right.
an entire, being, sense of being. And I just think about that type of erasure. I do think it dates all the way back to religious superiority. When you call someone a heathen, you don't call them human.
I think Bishop Tutu said it well. He said when they came to South Africa, we had the land, they had the Bible. He said, close your eyes and pray. We close our eyes and we prayed. We opened our eyes, they had the land, we had the Bible.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Let's talk a little bit about this document that the church put out in 1455. It not only did it establish religious superiority, which became white supremacy, it also made it clear that, because there's a difference between authority and power, right? So Columbus believed he had the authority from God to search out, invade, capture, vanquish, subdue. But the church also had the power to identify, to impose identity on everybody, not just Christians, but the church took upon itself the authority to impose identity on everyone. And it spoke about them as to vanquish and subdue all Saracens, pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, wheresoever placed. And so a lot of native scholars talk about this document as the church literally declaring war on the non-Christian world. And the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, and possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their profit. The authority that they took upon themselves to impose identity on the rest of the world. Speak about that.
I can say a few lines on that, if I may. When you think about Blacks, for example, and the whole notion of Christianity, and you think about all the images we saw that were supposedly of God, Christ,
Okay,
was white.
come on.
So somebody says, paint me a picture of how God looked. The Bible says that no man seen God at any time. So somebody said, no, I got some paint here, some white paint here. I'll paint the Sistine Chapel. And then you go into churches, even today, you will see, unfortunately, in some Black churches, this white Christ holding this white lamb and being the quote savior of the world. So if God is white and Christ is white and white is my enemy, why should I be a Christian?
I think this idea of confusing and confounding authority and power is so profound, Conrad, because it really feels like a big part of the crux of like what we struggle with in humanity. A friend of mine just preached yesterday on Jesus speaking with authority, and the assumption that I have always heard and always held myself was that Jesus speaks with authority because Jesus is God, and that's the kind of the understanding within the context of the Christian church. And while they were preaching, they said Jesus was speaking about oppression and about the abuse of widows and those without and those who were hungry. And the reason why Jesus had authority is because Jesus was also marginalized and oppressed and part of that society. And so the understanding that your lived experience gives you authority is something that I have never heard that preached before. God's power because God is powerful and God can lord it over. That's where God gets power from versus the power coming from actually being amongst and being with. And so from my particular Christian lens, obviously that's not the context for everyone, but that was really a profound sort of light shining on authority and power to control are not the same thing, although we have wed them together in our society.
That's right. That's right. I think too many have made the assumption that because they have power to control access, that means that they also have authority, and they're not the same. And white supremacy has imposed on us its power to control access. Back in the 1700s and all the way up to the 1900s, land may be owned by white men only. Mm-hmm. So we're making it clear that I have the authority and I will exercise the power to control wealth, because controlling land and controlling property is also controlling wealth. You see, so once you decide that wealth can only be held in white hands, now what does that mean for the generations? What does it mean for the generations that don't have access to generational wealth? When you have white people who are swearing up and down and their hair is on fire, because I was talking to a guy a couple of years ago whose hair was on fire. It was a white guy. His hair was on fire because, all of a sudden when Obama came into office, now all of a sudden everybody needs a cell phone. Now people are getting them Obama phones. So I asked him, so you're a hardworking guy and you believe that people should work hard for what they get. You're damn right. Because that's what you and your wife did. Well, you're damn right. We worked hard and we saved our money. And so what you're saying is that people should not get free things from the government because it's not good for them. Well, you're damn right. So then I say, so right now you're angry. You're angry because those farmers are getting billions of dollars from the government right now. As we speak, there are farmers in Kansas, in Idaho, in Nebraska, and Iowa who are getting billions of taxpayer dollars that you think they actually should give back because those lazy farmers are just taking your tax money. And you also would agree with me that the 160 million acres of free land that the federal government gave to white people, they should give it the hell back. Is that what you're saying? Because you and I are in agreement, my friend. We are in agreement. But no. I wasn't saying that. Well, I knew what you were saying. I knew where you were going, mister. You didn't know where you were going. So I just took you there. But yeah, so white people are all for small government. They're all for small government as long if it means if it means stop giving things to people of color. They are all for big government because it takes a big government to give away 160 million acres of land. That takes big government. So for all the small government white supremacists out there, you know, you're full of SH and the rest. I'm not even gonna give you the rest because you know where I'm going with that. But y'all are full of it. Y'all are full of it. You are for big government as long as it's giving stuff to white people. That's right. He said it. He said that. As long as big government is giving stuff to white people, you good. Once people of color start getting a share, because white supremacy, and I still want to hear more about identity, but white supremacy also assumes that life is a zero-sum game. So the concept of shared power doesn't exist in the white supremacist ideology. There are those with power, and then there are those who don't have it. In the white supremacist ideological perspective, that's all there is. It's zero sum. If I have power, then you don't. So the very idea of sharing power is foreign.
True.
Yeah,
I have a question for Nick. Oh, you're gonna say something? Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I could ramble a bit. So if you have a question that will zone me in or something, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you to say a little bit more about you mentioned something about the lens of white supremacy. Essentially, I'm going to paraphrase what you said, but kind of like sort of infecting or taking over the way that dominant culture sees everything, how everything should be, sort of even the basics of right and wrong. And as Conrad was speaking, I'm thinking back about the quote, the Columbus quote, and I think we have wedded this idea of cruel and smart, right? We have the dumb, kind person, the dumb, giving person, and that story, in that quote, the Native Americans don't sound very intelligent because they're so giving. They'd give everything away because it's shrewd to be greedy, and that even if it may not be kind, it is wise or it is smart. And we have these ways that we have these ideals. And I was just thinking even about that, like, why do we think that the person was foolish or unintelligent for giving what they had? We have kind of created this framework, and that feels similar to what you were saying about how it's even become the lens of how we see everything, how things should be, or what is true and what is, efficiency just is good, right? Whether or not efficiency might be white supremacist, it's just good. And so that kind of thinking, that quote, and then what Conrad was saying made me kind of put those things together. I wonder if you might say more about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there to talk about, especially when it goes into identity that Conrad was bringing up, because of all the processes I facilitated and with all of you, I think too, it becomes clear that, first of all, starting with religion, and I'm gonna call out Christianity here in particular because of its link to white supremacy. It's difficult to get people in a room identify as Christians and not talk about the ways that Christianity shapes who they are. And so part of people's identities, it's so wrapped up in that faith that they can't really think about who they are outside of it. And I don't think that's necessarily harmful, except and until we begin to layer in the superiority aspects of it and white supremacy. And I see the same with white folks. It's not always, sometimes it is. It's not always a conscious, I'm superior, it's who I am. And yet, if we don't have a system in place where hard work gets you somewhere, right? Even though it doesn't, we're not there, right? So we're not talking about what hard work actually gets you, but we believe it does. My identity is so wrapped up in what I believe this country to be: a freedom-loving, patriotic, hardworking, bootstrap, pulling up, gun-loving society, puts God first. I just went for a walk earlier tonight. I saw the Pledge of Allegiance on the United States flag with under God highlighted. If we pull those pieces of our society out of white people, what do we have? Well, for many of us, we don't have much of anything at all. We don't know who we are. So the way we identify ourselves is by living into this hard work culture, because our identities have been so misshaped by this sense of, by the superiority that's given to us. We're better than them. We have more than them. And generation and generation, it becomes, well, we kind of deserve it because it's just the way it is, right? And so I come along here, born in 1979. I don't have to think I'm better than anybody for me to understand that this way of life is the best because it's how I know myself. And so you take that from me, yeah, I'm gonna be pissed. I'm gonna be upset. And I think it's one of the things, even I go back to January 6th event, what was interesting and troubling was that it wasn't an insurrection at all, right? I mean, those people were storming the Capitol to maintain something, not to change anything. And what's really troubling is that for me as a white guy who's working and living for justice, I win no matter who wins that day in the Capitol. Had they done what they went to do, I'd still come out okay. Had they not, I still come out okay. And it's kind of the theme of this whole thing, right? Whiteness wins no matter what, because our identities and our sense of self and everything that's wrapped up into these institutions and our way of life they're so tied together that when push comes to shove, white folks don't want to end that. We don't want to overthrow that at all. We want to keep maintaining it.
Is it anger then, or is it fear?
People talk about fear a lot, and I know people also say anger is a secondary emotion, and that may or may not be true. I don't know, but I can tell you that some of the times I'm talking to white folks, they're not scared of people look like some of you having power. They're angry because I think there's an intrinsic sense when you're white that this country was made for you, that it exists for you to get to where you need to be. When I was young and I looked up and saw the presidents on the walls, every single one of them looked like me, every single one of them. And so I knew that whether or not I wanted to be or could be or was to be president was far more a matter of my own choice. I could if I wanted to, right? And so I just lost the question. Am I answering the question?
Well, I'm wondering, is it? I mean, and not to discount the anger, but I'm wondering, is it like a great terror?
Oh,
of what
right.
what there is to lose. Is I think of like a mother possum, like she looks incredibly angry, but she's like terrified for her babies, right? You know what I mean? And not that there's anything particularly wholesome about white anger, but I'm wondering, is there some kind of like terror of what will happen if I don't have who am I without this? What do I have?
Yeah. I definitely think there's fear wrapped up in it. Well, who am I? Right? So you take that kind of thing away. Who am I? And how am I going to make it? I got to where I am by all the things I did. My hard work got to where I am. So if you change how things are structured, how am I going to exist and survive? I'm sure that element is there as well. So I think ultimately it's probably a combination of fear and anger.
I think realizing that the idea of hard work and determination is a myth, I think scares white men, because white men, I think, are nurtured to believe that all of their accomplishments are the result of hard work and determination. And when they discover that it's about conquest and domination, I think that shakes them at the identity level.
Yes, because that's what I was over here, coming up for me was this when you were asking about pondering identity, and I wrote down comfort, familiarity, and an ownership of nothing. But yet you still believe you own it, whether it's culture, right? And so I think absolutely, I wrote down the myth of meritocracy, right? Of folks thinking I hit that home run on my own, when no, it was your social ties. But even if you're white and poor and everything else, you still look out and you have comfort and familiarity. And so I personally think that it is fear and anger of I I don't want I don't we had 45 almost in direct contact because they saw 8 years of blackness everywhere. Not saying Obama was flawless, right? But they still had to see 8 years and hear 8 years and more things infuse pop culture about the Black woman who was the first lady, about the 2 kids they were raising, about his mother-in-law, about his Black side. So it was Black excellence everywhere, right? We would be harming ourselves to think that 45 didn't come in direct response to that.
That's right.
So half of this is, I don't want to be the only one who walks in a room, because white folks don't ever have to. We as people of color, right? Especially if you're, walking around navigating or with a physical, cognitive, linguistic disability, LGBTQ, any of those, intersections, we can't choose. We can choose to be around our own, but we can't just get up, walk and navigate places and know that we will be of the advantaged or the larger number. I think it scares white folks to their core to think that they could get up and have to navigate the world and systems and deal with who once was the smaller number, now the larger number. Because every time I facilitate, I tell people your number one homework is go be where you know you're going to be the smaller number. Out of the hundreds of folks I've been in front of, potential thousands, I would be surprised if 10 did it. They'll do everything else on a handout. They'll check off every other bullet, but they are not going to go in a place where they know, oh, that's predominantly African-American, Black or brown environment. Because what naturally happens is they go, well, they might not want me there, or they may turn me around, right? Which is another piece of white supremacy of, I've got to know what I'm going into. I need to feel comfortable the entire time. And so I think this piece around identity, it's why they talk about the social safety net. We know what the largest social safety net is, right? It's intersected with capitalism. It is the companies who get bailed out. It is not welfare or the narrative of the welfare queen. So I think a lot of white supremacy is visibility. It is this falseness of there's a neutrality. And I always, remember having a long conversation with Nick. We were in a facilitation. I was a student. He was facilitating, but he gave the model of higher ed, and it stuck with me forever when he talked about higher ed going to get international students. I don't know if you remember this, Nick. And you were breaking it down, right? You were doing the continuum of how to be an anti-racist organization, but it blew the whole room open because you were like, okay, so let's be real. We're going to go get international students. Why? Because they have to have so much money in their bank account. So already it benefits the organization. The organization doesn't have to do anything but some paperwork to see how much money is in your bank account. So the international students come. What is all the models? They need to get acclimated. They, meaning the international students, get acclimated to whatever environment they're coming into. We don't ever think about the current folks in that environment need to go learn, study, grow, get familiar with the environments that these international students are coming from. That's white supremacy, because it's the comfort and visibility. It's the assumption, as you all named, that you're coming to me. Again, you should be privileged. You should feel okay. You need to learn about me in this environment, and I don't have to do crap for you. I think it's the underbelly of most of higher ed. First generation college students, you should just be happy that you're at the dance, or you should just be happy that I gave you a board to play. It doesn't matter that I colored the board with squares, so you don't know for months, potentially years, whether you're playing chess or checkers until I give you the pieces. And now you have an inkling, but but you could already be behind. I've known from the gate what game we were going to play. I could have studied. I could have figured out my favorite pieces, done my superstitions, whatever I needed to do. And now you're playing catch up because you weren't sure you were going to get invited to the game. You get invited, you're kind of happy. You don't know if it's chess or checkers. Now you get the pieces in front of you. You've got split seconds to figure out how to navigate that.
Mm.
So I think that piece of identity is that it's in our medical model. 6% of the first COVID trials is on African Americans. And before the sister who's running that task force got it, it was 4%. And she went and did a whole bunch of outreach to try to get it to 6. But why is that? Because the medical model is white, heterosexual, able-bodied men. And if it works on them, then we're just going to feed it to everybody else. It's media, right? The white guy saves the day in every freaking movie. I'm a little older than Nick, but MacGyver did everything with a roll of tape and a rope. Got out of every situation with some tape and a rope.
And
And a toothpick.
And a toothpick. Built bombs, no consequences. Destroyed property, no consequences. But he saves the day because he was justified. So I think when you eat that and you sleep that and you hear that, it is white supremacy acting on autopilot. But it's actually by design.
Very true. And very well said.
Yeah, by design, that is that's the punctuation. By design, white supremacy is not something that just happened. It is not an accident. Again, one of the pieces that I think we don't pay enough attention to is how being nurtured in white supremacist structures shapes our identity as people of color. Because the question becomes, how do you know what you know about who you are? So when you've relinquished that nurture, when you've relinquished that to an inherently racist education system, it continually tells you the wrong message about who you are. And one of the ways that it does that is, and I'm glad we're doing this on Black History Month, because one of the ways that it does it is if you have children and your children are doing math in first grade, they're learning numbers and that's great. But if you find that your children are doing the exact same math when they get to fourth grade, you have a problem because the school has a problem. And then if you find that when your children get to 8th grade, they're doing the same math that they were doing in 4th grade, again, you have a problem. 11th grade, they're doing the same math that they were doing in 8th grade, there is a problem. Or the same math that they were doing in 1st grade. So African American History Month was started by Carter G. Woodson in 1926, and it was Negro History Week. And he was concerned that African descendants were not learning about what it meant to be African and how our history did not start in 1619. But the other thing that what we've done with it in the way that we're doing it wrong is we've relinquished the responsibility of teaching our history. We've relinquished that responsibility to the school system. And what the school system does is 1st grade, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass. 4th grade, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass. 8th grade, Martin Luther King. You see, so by the time, you get to 12th grade and you're still doing the same usual suspects, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, right? So what we've allowed them to do is we've allowed them to take a subject and the communication happens in more than one way. There is spoken communication and there is unspoken communication. The unspoken communication that that we're giving to white kids and children of color is that this is not important at all. What it's saying to white kids is this is something that we're doing for them to make them think that some of their people had some significant achievements in history, but it's kind of, we just do this once a year just for them, and it's just these people, and we want them to think that their people made some significant contributions. So it says that to white kids, but the problem with that is it says the exact same message to children of color as well. So it's the exact same unspoken communication that this is not important. That yeah, a few of your people had a few significant achievements, right? So it just sends the wrong message that these individuals, these were specific individuals. We'll continue to talk about them from first grade to eighth grade, and we will not expand this curriculum in any way at all. And it also pretends that significant achievements that are global only have something to do with Africans. For instance, everybody out there who's putting on some hydrocortisone right now, if you're putting on hydrocortisone right now, you are doing so because a Black man made it possible. If you are sitting at a traffic light, you are sitting at a traffic light and you are safe at that traffic light because a Black guy decided that, you know what, that red light and that green light is just not enough because it's not giving people enough time and I'm seeing too many accidents. I think we can improve that. Let's put a yellow light in there. And so my point is, these are things that have impacted the world. And so as a United States, in the United States, we take pride in, as a country, we take pride in, an American will go anywhere in the world and brag about the Wright brothers. Mm-hmm. You see, you'll brag about the Wright brothers, but, you see, but there are other African descendants who have made significant achievements to the world. Yet that's Black history. And we don't even get them in. We had the same usual suspects from first grade to 12th grade. So yeah, I propose that we do African American history the wrong way, and it promotes white supremacy. Because the other unspoken communication in all of this is that every significant achievement that has happened in the history of man, and I say that because this is about white male supremacy, the history of man was a white male contributor.
Very true.
And definitely, I think what you bring up too is the fact that that very narrow selection of individuals is always going to leave out folks with multiple identities. So I think about, the Bayard Rustins, who didn't get his shine because he, loved the same sex. And so you don't find out, where is that ever taught? I mean, that you have all these different folks, the women who were part of the movement. If you go and look at history, it just looks like women fed people and made sandwiches. And that women didn't do anything else, that women weren't speech writers, that women weren't. So I think absolutely the way we do that of the same, 30, maybe 60 folks, you could do 2 vignettes a day. When I ran the radio station, I remember they were the same 30-minute and 60-second vignettes. And I don't think it was more than 60 individuals that they put in rotation between January 18th and the end of February. And that was it. So we also miss out, that piece of how does misogyny, heterosexism, Islamophobia, ableism, classism, how do all those things continue to marginalize individuals? Because it's, like you said, it's palatable. It's the people that white folks want to love in retrospect. Because the deal with King is many people love him years later.
Right.
As Julia Mallory, who just did a keynote address at the institution where I serve, one of her questions was, would you right now love King in his prime? When he was the activist, when he was marching for socioeconomic, when he was against the Vietnam War? Don't whitewash him and love him now.
Right.
All these years later, would you have loved him then? So what's your aspiring allyship now? Are you with the people who have the audacity to pose questions, to challenge tradition? So I appreciate that a lot when you were talking about intersections and still that piece around identity. Whose identity? Whose narratives get told?
Right. And how these imposed identities, see, these imposed identities impact how we see ourselves, because we internalize them. You see, we internalize these imposed identities and we play them out in how we treat ourselves and how we treat others as well. Because somebody else has told us what we know about everybody.
Part of it feels like it's deeply connected to the limiting and control of resources too, because if you define what success looks like in a society and we're busy trying to survive according to these parameters, it makes it hard. It really makes it hard to move outside of that. And, you know, similar to what I was kind of asking when Nick was commenting on earlier, if the society is viewing having goods and accumulating wealth as the marker of success, and then you limit access to wealth and goods, and you limit people's ability to have success, then when you say, you see, you're lazy, you see, you're no good, you see, poor equals, and you fill in all the blank, black equals, all these detrimental qualities, the evidence is it's self-fulfilling. And we end up actually internalizing that stuff about ourselves because, well, I'm not part of the group of people that is actually succeeding by what I've been taught success is. And you have this like constant, do I try and, you know, essentially divest from the system altogether? And then I have to remove all these scales from my eyes about what I even think goodness and success and happiness and thriving looks like? Or do I try to get mine in that system and learn how to navigate it? Which then means I have to actually believe the things they say, because you can't actually play the game without internalizing it. So it's real tricky. And that's why you have some people, you know, people of color voting for Trump or voting against their interests, I'll say. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about Trump specifically, but that's why we have that. We have internalized it, and we do then vote against our own interests.
Yes.
And that's why it took a very not progressive, very old, very white man to be someone who you would think by all other markers should be easy as hell to beat. Right? I mean, he's like, by all the standards that the Christians say, because they're the ones who vote for him, he's not a good man. And yet, only one person to beat him, someone who looks kind of a lot like him. You gotta be just as old, you gotta be just as white, you gotta be just as male.
Yeah, come on. Yeah.
I mean, it's wild.
Evangelical Christians have demonstrated their hypocrisy for at least the past 20 years or more.
Yeah,
Since,
Like this is the time when you think you're gonna be able to put, listen, bring me your most, bring me your blackest, most queer, most woman, most progressive. Bring me that candidate because nobody cannot beat this man. He's so awful, and yet it's not true. He's very, very, very acceptable in our society. He very much looks like our society.
yeah, there's no such thing, there's no such thing as Trumpism. Trump is simply the avatar for the racism that we've been living with since this nation began. Trump is the current mascot for the systemic racism that has always existed here. That's why in my conversations with people, I refuse to give him an ism because he doesn't deserve it. He is simply an avatar. He is not an ism. He's an avatar. And with that, I think we want to close a little bit early. I want to ask y'all I want to ask y'all to come back. for right now, we actually are planning another one of these for the 22nd. I've invited Congresswoman Cori Bush to come on. I haven't heard back from her, but listen, I'm ambitious, if nothing else. I've invited Cori Bush to come on and speak about white supremacy again, because she is the first congressperson of color who I heard stand at the podium and just literally call it what it is, the white supremacist in chief, and she spoke about it. And I love to hear her speak because her analysis is clear and she speaks with authority and power because her analysis is clear, as you said earlier, from her lived experience. And she speaks so eloquently from her lived experience. Her analysis is clear and she speaks with power. So I would love to be able to get her, even if she could spend 30 minutes with us and give us some meaty stuff to continue talking about. I'd like to talk with her about, since we know that we still live in a white supremacist society, in her opinion, what needs to be the primary organizing tasks for right now. So we're going to meet again and talk about that. What do we think the ongoing primary organizing tasks are for now, for moving forward?
King Conrad, if you're willing, I think Nick said that there was some questions from folks who've popped in or tuned in.
Let's try it. Can't hear you.
I knew I'd do that at least one time. So one of the questions we already kind of addressed. The other one that I saw here was it was about folks of color being conservative, voting for Trump. The other one I saw was what in your history helps give, I'm paraphrasing, but our knowledge of history, what gives us some hope that we can change, alter the white supremacist course that our country is in and has been going on.
Well, that's a good one. One of the things that I think white people have agreed with one another on, which is why the white secessionists in the South got their land back 10 seconds after the Civil War was over, is because white people in the South and white people in the North agreed on the ideology of white supremacy. So we were mad at y'all because y'all took up arms to dissolve the Union. But we agreed that white is supreme. So 10 seconds later, they got their land back, and they got their power base back. However, they did lose the war. They did lose the war, and white supremacy is not a United States thing. It is a global. White supremacy is global. So I think the organizing has to be more global, so that those because there are more of us than there are of them, and there are even some of them who kind of get it. So I think the organizing needs to continue because the struggle continues, and I think that the organizing needs to be global. And I am hopeful because I see such incredible organizers like Letitia Brown and Stacey Abrams, and I mean these incredible organizers that are organizing in ways that nobody thought could happen, yet they are, because some Black women said, "Oh hell no." The Black women said, "Oh hell no," and they got busy like Black women do. So I'm incredibly excited, and that's what I think about Cori Bush too. I just see so many Black and Latino women just organizing. Like AOC. I mean, they just are organizing organizing and making an impact. That gives me hope. Anybody else?
Definitely. I mean, I think I have hope, and actually, Jessica named one of it, which is folks running for office who
Yeah.
don't fit the traditional profile, i.e., Cori Bush, right? Who was part of, Ferguson. Was a organizer, and so I think folks running for office, and then of course getting support to do that. I think I know I have hope when folks with the membership in the marginalized, underrepresented, right, disadvantaged group are at the table with veto power, right? So not that metaphor about inviting me to the dance. No, because then I think I'm just chucking and jiving for you. I want to know what was the profit structure in the dance. I want input in the location. I want input in the music. I want input in the food. I want all of that. So folks with the lived experience being there to impact whatever it is, policy, organizing tasks, all that. I also think, and I cannot find it right now, but I saw it on social media. A brother said the goal for 2021 for Black and Brown folks should be to build their own and not go fix white organizations.
Hmm.
And it took the wind out of me because I was like, I think he was speaking to me. So sitting with that, right? And knowing that it's really all of the above. We need some folks who are committed to be within the white orgs and do that, but also like all that talent and resources and the skills you've cultivated and the credentials that you've earned and all that, then turn around and build it for you and yours and not trying to fix and help folks see the light. So I think I have hope in that. I personally have hope, and I say it all the time in the places and spaces I grace, which is think 3 or more. Like just try to bust the binary. If you can't do anything else, don't flip the coin, don't devil's advocate me. I need 3 or more options. Because I think when we do that, we get closer, to Sister Kimberly Crenshaw's piece of like being able to recognize how US structures make certain identities vulnerable. And so when you are creating 3, 4, 5 possible scenarios, you're getting closer to people with multiple identities. So that definitely gives me hope. And the last one is I was got exposed to a brother named Matthew R.K., last name Kaye, and he wrote a book called Not Light, But Fire. And one of the things that I walked away from is he coined this phrase called day afters. And he talks about how when we have these tragedies or events or whatever, like January 7th or the day after Columbine or, the day after Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, may they rest in power, what happens on these day afters?
Yeah.
And he kind of speaks from a perspective of educators that it often falls in people in classrooms, K through 12, college, wherever, who are supposed to hold space or have these conversations or
Right.
teach like nothing happened.
Right.
But I'm busted open with that concept of we got some work to do around those day afters, whether it's our resistance and the tweets and the prayers for gun violence. Over that, you've done nothing with your 120 characters, right? If we still can't get gun, safety stuff passed. So this piece is sitting with me about day afters and how do we do that? How do we have those courageous, challenging conversations in an org? How do we know social justice principle that racism impacts all of us? It impacts us differently. Therefore, we have different work to do in it. I just wish I could have been in some spaces where that was the message on January 7th, right? Instead of kind of boiled down, we are the world,
Yeah.
be nice to people messages. That's not speaking anything to me. I have to navigate all these structures with some humility just for survival. So you didn't just help me, you spoke to the masses, not me. And so I really appreciate that brother for writing the book because he said he went to go research and see what was out there about how to have these conversations, and he didn't. All he found was literature about why it's good to have the conversations. So what did he do? He turned around and wrote the book, giving some clues of how. So I think people who do that, who see an absence, whether it's contributing to the body of knowledge, whether it is creativity, art, business, services. I have hope in folks who just go, I went looking for something, I felt something in my lived experience, and I'm going to explore that. And then if it ends up creating films and museums.
Hey, what happened?
Sorry, if it's like, like our King Dan Moore, then our world is better for it. And I've got to have hope in someone who is a filmmaker and museum founder and thought it was going to be 2 or 3 years and it's 40 years later. It's teachers like yourself, Conrad, who give of lived experience, who stand in front of rooms with arguable strangers, though we were kin before we ever met. And you were able to say so many freeing things that I cried in front of you while you facilitate. That gives me hope. Sister Jessica, who hears a message she hasn't heard before and doesn't just go, oh, that was lovely, but contemplate it in her spirit and then finds and is presented on this panel to now go share that with other people. Right. And one of the main reasons why I'm so appreciative of Nick Miron was in watching this white male say things I had never heard of a white male mouth before. And his willingness to talk about masculinity and the messages that he got in his childhood and how he had to unpack or unlearn or reframe or reclaim different pieces. All of that, all of you give me hope.
It's a great note to end on.
I appreciate that. Yeah, hallelujah. Hey, anybody who's still watching, y'all can make donations to Roots of Justice. We still take donations. And you also can donate to the Apex Museum. The Apex Museum takes donations, doesn't it, on the day?
Positively.
So you can find the Apex Museum online. There's a great book out there called The White Male Agenda. You can also find that on Amazon. It's a good book. And I highly recommend it. Also, I'm doing a blog series. I'm putting it out hopefully tomorrow. I've already written quite a bit of it. I'm having it. My editors are looking at it right now, but it's a series. I'm going to put out part 1 probably this week. How to be a Christian without being racist. That is the title. How to be a Christian without being racist. So I think a few people might click on that.
Powerful.
So who wants to close us out? Shaashawn, I think you just closed us out.
And I agree. It was very, very a pleasure meeting all of you, really was. And it's a powerful, powerful piece to put in place because the minds are the same, the mission is the same, and not be the outcome will be the same.
Thanks, everybody. I can't tell you how proud I am to be able to do this work with you. And with that, we'll close.
All right.
Good night, everyone. Love y'all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.